Well, good evening, everyone. It is still Wednesday, the 15th of April. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about now, and the first one is an apology. I used a term in the video this afternoon which was ill-advised and completely erroneous. I said New World Order. Now, I had no idea that a New World Order related to some conspiracy theory of some total world government. Believe me, that horrifies me just as much as it would horrify you. So I didn't mean that at all. And it's not what I advocate. Let me just be quite clear about that. So my apologies for those I have upset. And some people were genuinely upset. So hands up, apologies, made a mistake. But what I was actually thinking of when I used the phrase, albeit inadvisedly, was what happens after the COVID-19 pandemic, and have been starting to think about a few things that we can learn and a few ways that we can make things better in the world that we will live in after COVID-19, which is not a new world order. Right. So what I'd like to do is I was going to bring this to you a bit later on, but seeing I needed to come on and apologise anyway, I thought I'd do it now, because it was what I was thinking of. And I think what I'd like to do is, if you've got ideas of your own as well, then put them in the comments. Now, things are quite busy just now, but I will try and collate them over the next few weeks, so that we kind of come up with something that is a consolidation of what we learn from the mistakes that have been made over the past few months in different places by different people. So let me just share my thinking with you, and you can accept it, reject it, but if you've got your own ideas, I would appreciate them. And I think it's a genuinely important thing to do, that we try and collate this and relate it to things that we're going to learn for the future, things that can make things better for the next generation as well, and that they'll learn from the mistakes that have been made. So, and I've clicked the wrong screen again. I'll learn to do that one day. Right, so things to learn for the future. Now, this is just me thinking out loud, so you can agree, you can disagree, or you can give me your own suggestions. But one of the things I feel has come out of this is we need to reduce global infrastructure dependency. So this idea that you can eat peas flown in from Kenya or something, and then when we don't have the air travel, we can't do that. So this idea that we've become dependent on a global infrastructure seems to be an intrinsic weakness, because we've seen what happens when air traffic goes down, and it just messes things up. So we kind of need to reduce our dependency on that kind of technology trap, I'm starting to think. And part of that is improving local provision. So this could be things like food supply, so we're not doing as many food miles. And of course, the one that's come up quite starkly is even the United States can't produce a lot of their own pharmaceuticals. They rely on imports from India. Now, this is not because people in America are stupid. They're not. They're brilliant. It's not because they're not entrepreneurial. Of course they are. It's just that it's cheaper to get them from India, cheaper to fly them in. Well, when there's a trouble with flights, then you might realise that you haven't got enough pharmaceuticals for your population, and that is a real problem. So I think we need to improve local provision of these essentials like food, like pharmaceuticals. So have local means of producing essentials such as drugs, that these can be produced in country. So when I was working in Cambodia, there was a Korean pharmacologist I was working with, and he went off to Phnom Penh to do this. And he started a unit in Phnom Penh to produce just some basic drugs for Cambodia, so that Cambodia wasn't dependent on imports. And a lot of his motivation was, at the time there was a lot of imports coming from China and other places that the preparations were actually counterfeit. So counterfeit drugs were being sold and produced by locals. So he wanted to get around that, but he needed to do it locally, so less dependent on imports was his thinking. And I agree with that. Now, the lockdown has highlighted the importance of our contact with the natural world. So if you live in a nice house with a bit of an estate, where you can go out for a walk, or you live in a nice house even with a garden, then you're fortunate, because some people are stuck in flats with no access to the outside world and very little access to nature. And people have been doing things like watching videos of fields and people picking food and growing potatoes and things, things that relate to the natural world. So to me, the lockdowns highlighted the importance of our contact with the natural world, that we need to see the stars, that we need to see the blue of the sky and the green of the earth. We need these things. I believe that we need these things for our mental health. And this has just sort of highlighted that, really, that we need this contact with the natural world. Live with others on the planet, with cooperation, collaboration and respect with others and animals. So I think what we need to realise, what this zoonotic virus has showed us, that we are not independent. We don't even live in family or tribal groups, but we are interdependent with the ecology of the planet. And we are part of that ecology, and we depend on that ecology. So we have to live in a way which is more cooperative and less exploitative with other animals and with the ecology of the planet as a whole. So if that comes out of this, that would be good. And today I did talk about the reduced amounts of air pollution. I've worked in some parts of the world where the air pollution is absolutely terrible. Especially when the sun comes out and you get all sorts of nasty chemicals forming, and it always gives me chest infections if I work in polluted cities, and we really need to think about that. So this idea with cooperating, collaborating with the ecology could probably come out of this. Now, this idea of flying around the world, that it's kind of some sort of fundamental right that I can fly where I want, if I want, when I want, if I flipping well feel like it. I mean, it's just a ludicrous attitude. In the past it took people months or years to travel around the world, and the idea we can just hop on a plane and go anywhere has kind of become normalised. Well, it's not really normal. It's a privilege that's only been enjoyed really for the last few years, certainly in an affordable format in the last sort of 20 years or so. My parents, I think my parents have flown once in their lives. So, this has been a complete change, and we've already sort of taken this change for granted, that we can fly where we want, when we want. That attitude needs to be moderated, I think. And one of the things that's come out of this, which is good, is there's just been so much interconnectivity, exactly like we're doing now. So if I want to chat to someone, I can chat to you, and if you choose to listen, then that's wonderful, thank you. Or we can have more video conferences, the Skype calls, the Zoom calls and all that kind of stuff. As long as we can deal with the cyber security and observance and potential totalitarian issues in that, then the actual principle of that is great, that we can, the amount of times I've driven 100 miles to a meeting is just ridiculous when you can just go on a computer and have it. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that's just brought that to light. People flying around the world for meetings, people flying around the world for conferences. This chap that brought the infection back to England was I think he was at some sort of conference in Singapore. Singapore! It's the other side of the world for a meeting or a conference. I think we need to sort of get a grip on that. And we don't need to now, because we've got all these wonderful fibre optic cables connecting the world. Face difficulties with a common coordinated response. So the response in many areas has been disparate to this virus. Even within countries, we've had agencies working against each other, or regions within a country working against each other. And that really doesn't help. It's been a massive hindrance, in fact. So we need to find out, or to develop strategies for coordinated responses to common difficulties. Openness and transparency. Now, the population of my country, for example, and the population of, say, a country like Spain or Italy, when I looked at the way the Chinese population were cooperating with the lockdown, which wasn't as widespread as we have in Europe now, I was amazed, and I thought, well, the European people wouldn't do that. They wouldn't be sufficiently disciplined. And they proved me completely, utterly wrong. They are. They are. They have stepped up to the plate and done what is required. And the reason I believe for that is that they understand that I'm not saying all the Western governments are brilliant and have been completely transparent. We know they haven't. But basically, when people understand the need for something, they're prepared to put up with a lot of hardship. And people are putting up with a lot of hardship at the moment. We know that. But people understand why, because they know why. There's been some openness and transparency that we realise that this is a virus that kills people. And we need to act against it. And, for example, the reason that came to mind was the early Chinese response, where the openness and transparency was suppressed with the power of law. And Dr. Lee was forced to sign a retraction from what he knew was medical truth. So everywhere we need openness and transparency, and it's not there yet. I'm still not satisfied with the openness and transparency. By any means, I'm not satisfied. And that goes hand in hand with truth telling. If we level with people, people are reasonable on the whole. And I think that's been demonstrated quite well. So truth telling needs to be a fundamental principle of the way that we deal with each other and that governments deal with us, I believe. And indeed the way that we deal with governments. And then there's the idea of anticipating problems. So the World Health Organization was saying, you can just go on flying to China. They didn't seem to anticipate the problem. And there was this short-termism. Look, if we stop flights in and out of China in February, that's going to disrupt trade. Well, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road, and now it's 10 times worse. If they'd just stopped those flights for a period of time, maybe everything would be all right again now. Or if there'd been transparency at an early stage, maybe there would have been no pandemic at all. So anticipate problems, unlike the World Health Organization in this particular case. Not saying the World Health Organization haven't done some good stuff since. They have. They've got some brilliant people working for them, and I believe we need to follow many of their recommendations. But I think they got it wrong in the early stages of this pandemic. And I did say this, albeit diplomatically, at the time. Mistakes have been made. Questions do need to be asked and answered. Contingency planning comes into that as well. So contingencies for new eventualities. So an obvious one now is, how do we instigate an international program that allows us to make vaccines a way quicker? Because if we had a vaccine for this pandemic now, it could go away in a month. But we haven't got one because we can't make them quickly. So that's just one example. We need a way of making vaccines quickly. Now, there's no shortage of clever scientists in this world. We need to get them working on it. And that means, I suppose, the governments need to pay people to work on it. That's just one example, but this contingency planning. So what do we do if this goes wrong? I think there needs to be much more of that. We can learn that from this outbreak. And don't opt for short-term gains. Like, as I've said, I'm a bit obsessed with this, but it was such a fundamental error in my view. So short-term gains. So the later the shutdowns occurred, the longer they need to be shut down for. So if people and countries had shut down at a much earlier stage, then again, we could be back to normal potentially by now. You know, if you delay it, you're making it worse. Now, if you've got a toothache, go to the dentist as soon as it starts hurting, not when your tooth is decomposing and falling out and you're getting an abscess. So don't opt for short-term gains, this short-termism. The economy seems to work on short-termism, and that is a problem. We need to think more strategically. You know, the people that started building the cathedrals realised they would never be finished in their generation. You know, but personally, I mean, I'm quite old now, and I'm obsessed with planting trees. You know, I might never see them grow, but you know, I think we should plant lots of trees. We've got to think ahead. It's got to be long term. Now, these are just a few things that I've come as a result of working in and out of hospitals for 40 odd years. Modern hospitals, there's just not enough space in them. Now, when I was a young staff nurse, we had great big long wards called Nightingale wards with great big spaces between beds, and you could open all the windows, so it was fantastic. So we could go around, make all the beds in the morning, open all the windows, get nice and lots of nice fresh air, have a cup of tea, and then we'd go back and do the dressings when the air was clearer, so they weren't getting dust and things in the dressings. So have windows in hospitals that open to allow in fresh air. So many buildings now, it's not just hospitals, but so many buildings that there's just no access to fresh air. You can't open the windows. So we need to work out a way to let fresh air in our buildings, because we know the virus concentrates in stuffy areas. And so many hospitals now have toilets on the inside, and they stink. You know, in the old buildings, all the toilets had large outside windows. And I've actually worked on many wards where there was huge balconies, and you can actually push the beds out onto the balconies to let the patients get some fresh air and some sunshine, as they did in the 1918-19 pandemic, as they did throughout the tuberculosis years. So that's just a few. That's my thinking so far. I know it's very provisional. Just a few ideas. So do leave your ideas of things that we can learn and things that we can change, whether it's things in general or whether it's more specific points. And please do accept my apology about the phraseology of New World Order. I have read George Orwell, and it terrifies me. Make no mistake about that. So apologies to anyone I've upset today. But no, I think this is worth thinking about. So have a think about it. Do leave your comments, talk about it, and let's try and get some good things for the future, for the post-pandemic era, if that's a better term of phrase.